So I've just come back from Amaravati in the UK. Yesterday was a travel day, so I'm kind of low energy, a bit jet lagged, but we'll see what's what. The first week I was there was for Lungpa Samedo's retreat. Every evening he give a Dhamma talk, and I found it very, very good and stimulating. The theme of all his talks was pointing to the Thai forest practice of meditation on the citta, bringing the mind into the citta. The phrase that Lungpa Samedo likes to use is consciousness knowing itself. And this is really the essence of the Thai forest practice, going back to Ajahn Mun. And we see it in Ajahn Mahabua and Ajahn Chah. This idea of centering yourself in the citta and letting the process unfold from a position of the knowing mind. Ajahn Chah liked to use the phrase Puru, the one who knows. It's a Thai phrase, Puru, the one who knows. Find the one who knows. He, and also I think Ajahn Mahabua, would use the phrase find your real home. Going home. Your citta is your home. This is a way of practice, a way of looking at the process that is found also in other traditions. It's the underlying principle of both Tibetan Dzogchen and Mahamudra, which are the highest practices of two different schools of Vajrayana. That the essence of the practice is centering in the knowing mind. A lot of the Zen stories and koans and anecdotes are based on this as well, finding the knowing mind. Even in European tradition, European mysticism, there's the alchemy. There's an alchemical symbol of the Ouroboros. It's the snake biting its own tail. This is the symbol of mind knowing itself. And the full image is the snake bites his own tail and keeps eating until there's nothing left. This is which, if you contemplate that image, it's impossible to kind of visualize the last bite where there's nothing left. And this is an underlying paradox in the practice, is the mind knowing itself, consciousness knowing itself, or awareness of the citta, is that the citta is essentially subjective. And it is that which knows. It's the process of knowing. But it's a quandary or a conundrum to have it as an object, because if you're aware of it as an object, then it's no longer the subject. And I run into this years ago with my mind's drawing a blank. Maybe somebody else remembers the name of the Tibetan Rinpoche who comes to Thunder Bay sometimes? Yes. He gave a lecture on some Tibetan practices, and he got into Dzogchen. And he was using almost the same language as Lungpa Samedo. He said that the essence of the practice is to be aware of the awareness, I think. I can't remember exactly his phrasing, but it was the same kind of idea. And they had a question and answer period, but I didn't want to ask a question in the group because I just thought it wasn't politics. For a Theravadan monk to question him would sound like I was challenging him, and my intention wasn't to challenge him, but I was intrigued by his talk. So I spoke to him afterwards privately, and I asked him, you said that we should practice mind being aware of itself. Is that even possible? And he kind of hemmed and hawed a bit, and in the end he said, no, it's not, but it's a really good practice to try. So this is something that I think is very important to work with that underlying conundrum, even if it's impossible for the snake to take the last bite. That's what we're really endeavoring to do. And when the snake does take the last bite, then there's nothing left. It's the emptiness. It's important when we're thinking about the citta that we don't objectify it, make it into something solid, and we certainly don't want to make it into a self. It's simply the process of knowing. There's another line that it came from one of Luang Por Sumedho's talks. He quoted Ajahn Panyawudo saying, the citta is real, but it doesn't exist. The khandhas, the aggregates, exist, but they're not real. That's a good koan for you to contemplate. The citta is real, but it does not exist. The khandhas exist, but they are not real. I'm very fond of the Zen story. I'm sure you probably all heard me quote it several times about the two monks talking about the nature of mind. And one of them says it's a mirror in a high place, that a brilliant mirror located in a high place that illuminates the 10,000 things, and they're all reflected in the face of the mirror. And the other monk says, well, that's close, but it's not quite right. The mirror in a high place is brilliant and illuminates the 10,000 things, but nothing is reflected in the face thereof. Also in Zen tradition, there's the story of the sixth patriarch. It's a very famous, beloved story in Zen tradition. Is the sixth patriarch of the Zen tradition in northern China. It was still called Chan. And this is before it went to Japan. This is within China. And the fifth patriarch, when he got old and wanted to retire from active duties, he announced he was going to have a contest to choose his successor, who could come up with the best one stanza poem expressing their understanding of Zen. And the sixth patriarch was this young country bumpkin who showed up. And they always refer to him in the stories as a ignorant and unlettered southerner. This is, the northern Chinese look down on the southern Chinese as being like country bumpkins. And they had him in the, when he showed up, they didn't take him seriously, and they had him in the basement scrubbing pots. And all his scholar monks were composing their poems, and one who was, everybody thought he was the favorite choice to be the winner. He composed this poem, and all the poems were stuck up on a board. And one day, this young fellow who was later to become the sixth patriarch, he was walking down the hall and he saw all these poems, and he couldn't read. He asked somebody, what's all this about? And they told him, this is to choose the successor. And one of the other monks said, this is the one who's probably going to win. It's very brilliant. And he pointed out this poem, and it was again based on the idea of the mind as a mirror. He said that the mind is like a mirror bright. We must carefully polish it every day so no dust settles. And the sixth patriarch said, what a load of nonsense here. Somebody write one for me. And he said, trying to remember exactly how it goes. It was there is no mirror, there is no dust, so no need to clean what cannot settle, something like that. And of course he won, and the fifth patriarch gave him the bowl and robes and told him to leave quickly because there was going to be a big trouble. So he was like in hiding for a while. He left but he's considered the correct lineage of Zen tradition. So that that first poem is the way of mistakenly understanding the knowing mind. And it is part of the problem is language. We're forced in any language we use, whether it's English or Thai or Pali or Chinese or whatever, Tibetan, we have to use nouns to talk about mind, consciousness, and so on. It's just kind of built into the structure of the language. And that creates a false impression or a implicit assumption that there's something there. No, it's real, but it doesn't exist. There's the knowing, but there's no thing that knows. There's simply the knowing. And when you're centered in the knowing, when you can find that and exist in that space, then everything is just as it is. There's no difficulty. There's really no suffering, no dukkha in that place. It just knows. And it's elusive. It's tricky to understand it or to find it, not because it's complicated, but because it's so absolutely simple. We want to complicate it. If it was complicated, if there was something we could put a handle on and make a theory about and describe it, then it would be easier to grasp. But it's just as it is. Oh, first tick of the year for me. So we have in the broad scope of Theravada tradition, we have two ways of looking at the practice. We can either focus on the object or the subject of mind. And both ways work. Both ways are essentially leading us to the same place, but from different directions. The Burmese tradition, which teaches various techniques of vipassana and is very well known in the West in the forms of Goenka tradition and Mahasi tradition, these are all about looking at the objects of consciousness. Whatever arises to the mind is known clearly. And in one of Mahasi's writings, he expresses that at a certain stage of the meditation, when it's advanced, then it comes to be that there's only the object and mind arising to the object and no third besides. It's one of his famous phrases, and the no third beside is referring to a self. When it's clearly seen, there's just the object and the subject. There's no self is found. That's all there is in the process. And that Burmese tradition finds that by methodically examining the objects. But to do that, you have to be centered in the knowing mind. The Thai forest tradition, on the other hand, starts with the knowing mind. You're centered in the knowing mind. But when you're centered in the knowing mind, then all the objects of consciousness become clear. So you end up doing the same thing. The objects are absolutely clear when you're centered in the knowing mind, because you're not caught in the grasping. The whole process of the dependent origination of samsaric becoming happens because we, out of ignorance, we don't operate from the knowing mind. We get caught, we grasp, we identify with the objects. with the various sense impressions and mental states, and we get lost. The kind of visual metaphor is to think of it as a concentric circles. That the knowing mind, or the chitta, is the absolute center, and it's like the eye of the hurricane. It's absolutely still, and around it are circling all the objects, all the samsaric becoming. It's like a whirlpool or a hurricane whirling around. And if you're in the center, it's all calm and clear, and you can be aware of the stuff whirling around, but you're not affected by it. But if you identify with anything outside of that, then you're caught. You're caught up in the whirlpool, and you're spun around, and you've lost the thread. And you're going to experience suffering as a result. This image of the concentric circles could also be extended to apply to the different levels of mind. In this version, the unconditioned is at the center. Then the formless is just outside the center. Then the level of form, and then the sense desire level in increasingly outer circles. And as you move out from the center, it becomes more diffuse, more diverse, more confusing. There's more stuff going on. So the state of the formless abidings, and being in the state of neither perception nor non-perception, is like samsara at its minimum, minimalist samsara. And being in jhana is about in the middle, and then being in ordinary human waking consciousness is the furthest out and the most confused and bewildering and easiest to get caught in. When the chitta has as its object the unconditioned, nibbana, that's the snake taking the last bite. This is then the ultimate mystery and the end of the path, is when the chitta is taking the unconditioned as an object.